when you are a people pleaser and you haven't had boundaries and then you're setting boundaries, it's uncomfortable for you. It's uncomfortable for the people that have known you in a certain way. The truth, though, is that the people that are meant to be in your world are going to be the ones that are uncomfortable and then readjust alongside you.
Welcome to the Core Happiness Podcast. I'm your host, Casey Banks, a mindset and positive psychology coach. On this podcast, we discuss all things related to creating happiness from within. So let's do it. Welcome back to the Core Happiness Podcast. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Kamini Wood, a human potential coach, author, and the host of Rise Up, Live Joy Your Way podcast. Kamini helps high achievers break free from imposter syndrome, codependency, and perfectionism so that they can lead with confidence, compassion, and clarity. In today's conversation, we dive deep into healing toxic relationship patterns, moving beyond shame and guilt, and learning how to become a self-leader who creates joy from the inside out. Today is packed with so much great information. I wanted to keep going, and there might be a part two. So we hope you enjoy. Let's dive in. Kamini, welcome to the show. It is so great to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me.
I am excited to talk to you about a lot of things today because I know that you work with a lot of high achievers who usually are trying to work up to some type of expectation. And I know that you help high achievers move from the state of perfection and people pleasing into a more authentic kind of self-leadership. And I think so many of our listeners can resonate with that. So for people who don't know you yet, can you share a little bit about what got you into this work and helping people overcome imposter syndrome and reclaim self-worth?
If I'm going to break it down to like the bare, transparent truth, it's because that's how I showed up in the world, right? That was me. I was the people-pleasing perfectionist, always over-functioning and over-giving to the point of losing myself. But the pathway of how I ended up here is I actually was in the business world as a project manager by trade. So what I was doing from a professional standpoint was truly helping people accomplish the goals that they had for themselves and then identifying what it was that they needed in order to meet those goals. At the same time, I'm actually the mom to 5. But at the time that all that was happening professionally, my kids were getting to that preteen stage and they were starting to emulate a lot of that people-pleasing perfectionism. And I say this to everybody, they became my mirror, right? They became my catalyst because I recognized in them how I was showing up. And it was my invitation that if I wanted something different for my kids, then I needed to take a hard look at myself as a parent and do my own personal development. So I went headfirst into, okay, what's going on for me personally? Where did some of this perfectionism come from? How is the people pleasing holding me back? And there's a lot of revelation that happened during that process. And as I came through that, I'm still growing. We're all growing and evolving. But that was my wake-up call of purpose, right? Like I went through this so I could learn more. And now it's up to me to help others. It's about how do you pay things forward? And so I leaned into taking what I loved from my professional work, which was helping people create an understanding of what they needed, pair it with this thing that I know a lot of us deal with, those of us who are high achievers. We do a lot of this internal dialogue. Bring those two worlds together and create this one-to-one practice to work with people. And really what I do is I create space for that deeper understanding of self, because when we have that understanding of self, we can then take action to shift things that are no longer serving us.
Yeah, definitely. And we talk about this so much on Core Happiness and the podcast because I went through the exact same thing. There was a moment when I was working as a producer, project manager in the entertainment business where I was on a trip working on a production in California, and I had a moment where back home, my father needed me, and I just felt kind of pulled between trying to be in 2 places at one time. And there was this moment where it just kind of clicked, and it hit me all of a sudden where I was just like, wait a minute, does my day-to-day actually align with what matters to me? Because I'm running and gunning, I'm successful on paper.
Yep.
Everybody around me is like, you're doing great. And then I started talking to people like, hey, do you have this feeling like I'm having this pull and I'm not quite sure what that pull is toward? And everyone's like, what are you talking about? You're at the top of your game right now. You should be super grateful and excited. And I was just kind of like, I don't know. I feel like something's missing because I love my job. It's fun. But when I look
Mhm.
at my values and where I'm spending my time, I was working 90-hour weeks and I was never, ever home. I was constantly traveling. When I looked at the time I spent with my family and when I started to think about memories, they were all work
Mhm.
related or with my colleagues, and I didn't have any with my friends. And I started
Mm.
to really think about the being a high achiever and putting all my time and effort into work and then not putting the time and effort into things that I said that I valued, which
Yes.
was family, friends, and that type of thing. And so I started looking at where these expectations were coming from.
Mhm.
And a lot of it was external, but I really felt that I had to live up to that external expectation in order to be successful. And when I was talking to other people in the same field of work, everybody was like, "Oh, yeah, I feel the same way. That's normal." And I was like, "But is it?"
Is it normal?
I
Yes.
started to question, like, is this
Yeah.
normal? So I'm wondering for you, like, did you have a specific moment or a trigger that you can remember that you just kind of were like, wait a minute, I'm living a little bit from external validation versus my own inner truth?
Oh, absolutely. It used to come up, especially in your point, right? Where people are like, oh my gosh, you're doing so well. What are you talking about? It was that affirmation, like that would almost, it fuels the, oh,
Mm,
this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And so then you almost get caught in that cycle of looking for that external affirmation. And as long as you're getting that, you're like, oh yeah, I just need to keep doing this. But then to your point, it doesn't have the same meaning because it's not fully aligned with your values. Like my value has
mhm,
always been family and connectivity. And yet I was doing all these things. And while I was doing for family members as a mom, I was constantly doing for my kids. It was the doing, it wasn't the being. And that's what was the feeling. Like it just felt slightly empty and like something was missing because
mhm.
I'm doing all these things. But to your point about memories, it, it almost like it's fleeting. And so like a summer would go by and I'd look back and say, "Kamini, what did we just do? I don't even remember all the things we did because there was not any part of me that was being in those moments. It was all
Mhm.
about producing and doing because the doing meant that I was worthy and enough and all the things. And I do think that this is somewhat of what we deal with as high achievers. And I work with teens all the way through adults. And with my high achieving teens, the thing that I notice is they're doing really well in school. And then the fear of potentially not getting a 95 on something. And it's because as high achievers, once we've had that quote unquote success, everything is then measured by that. So it's like, how do you keep run upping? And that in and of itself creates burnout and also tremendous fear, which is why I think
Mhm.
imposter syndrome is so big and looms so large because there's this fear of I'm going to get found out. God forbid I don't get that promotion or I don't get the next A plus. Now suddenly I'm a fraud. I was never that really high achieving person. And we tell ourselves that lie.
Absolutely. That is so true. And I work with a lot of executives and people in the corporate space. And
Mhm.
that is from where a lot of their burnout comes from, right? It's like starting all the way from day one. As soon as I got the job, I wanted to prove that I was the right hire. I went
Yep.
above and beyond. And the intention was I'm going to show that I was worthy. So my first 90 days, I'm coming out of the gate super strong. I'm going to go
Mhm.
above and beyond. I'm going to work 150%. I'm going to give
Yes.
everything that I have. And what they don't realize is that they are setting that standard.
Yes.
That's the standard. You're expected to show up as all the time.
Yep.
You can't pull back at 90 days. That's what we think, but that's not reality because now when you pull back, they're going to be like, well, what happened?
What
Right.
happened?
And so it's
Exactly. Because they become used to you working at that level. Not only them, but you yourself, like internally. And so then it's
yes,
almost like, because then you think you're not doing enough. Like you
yes.
yourself, as a high achiever, struggle with that.
Hmm.
It's the idea, I've had to deal with this too, where it was the fear of taking your foot off the gas pedal. It's like, oh gosh, then all the world, everything's going to come off, right? The wheels are going to come.
Yes.
And that's what happened. We put ourselves into that cycle of giving that 150%. And then that becomes the new normal. And then you have to push yourself to give 200%. And then you get there and it's like, well, now I got to give 250. No wonder why I'm burnt out.
Exactly. And then you also said something that I was just like an aha moment to me when you said that you were more in the doing than the being. And I was like, oh my gosh, that hit me because I think that we get so confused and we start to equate the being with doing. And so there's not a separation anymore. And so in order to be and have this level of worthiness and prove that I can take up space in the world and that I'm getting all these accolades and rewards, it's from the doing. So then if I do take my foot off the brake, if I do slow down, then who am I?
Right. Right.
And so
Yes.
that
Yes.
really hit me.
It's funny because with my clients, sometimes I'll even say, who do you want to be in this situation? And they look at me a little bit like deer in headlights. What do you mean, who do I want to be? The point is we have to challenge ourselves to look at how do I want to show up in terms of what values, what character strengths, what parts of our inner core in terms of who we want to be, rather than I want to bake the 24 cupcakes. Who do you want to be when you're baking those 24 cupcakes? Because then you're going to remember that. Then it becomes a memory instead of just I baked 24 cupcakes. And then I check that off my list and I go on to the next thing.
Absolutely. This one thing that makes me think about is a little bit of codependency, where we really need, it seems like, and I feel like this has become almost an epidemic at this point, but it's like we need that external validation. I feel like that shows up in any type of relationship. I think that shows up with coworkers. I think it shows up with friends. I think it shows up with your family. It shows up with intimate relationships. So I know you talk a lot about the patterns of codependency and toxic relationships, but are there subtle ways that show up that we might not even realize, especially when you are thinking about relationships that look healthy from the outside but are not healthy?
So funny you're asking me this. I literally just got off of a coaching call with somebody. We were talking. I was asking questions to help her maybe see this a subtle way. My partner wants to be with me and wants to hang out with me all the time. Sounds so loving and so wonderful. And isn't that amazing? And it's yes, to a point. There also has to be this part where you're each your individual person. You each have your own interests rather than everything has to be together. Because what ends up happening is that's when we become codependent. I need this person to function, essentially. We lose our own needs, desires, wants. And so what we're striving for, what we need to work for is interdependence, where there's that overlapping. Sure, this is the us part of us. And these are our interests that we share together. But there's also individuality happening too. Each person has a set of friends that they hang out with. They don't always have to hang out together, as an example. But it can be so subtle because it just seems so, romantic movie type thing where we spend all this time together and it is beautiful. It's like the Jerry Maguire movie where there was that statement in the line and everybody swooned. I did too, where they say, "You complete me."
Yep.
And it's beautiful. That idea is so beautiful. And also, really, do we want somebody to complete us or do we want to complement each other? That would be like my number one subtle way. Codependency shift. The moment you feel like you need that other person. The other thing is when you feel like you're catching yourself have that need to be needed, that's a good indication, right? That maybe you've got some codependent tendencies because you're getting your worth from being needed.
That's so interesting because that is sort of the narrative that is put into anything, really, if you think about it. Like it's put into romance movies, books. Like anytime we're thinking about the ideal relationship, it's always kind of this like, oh, but I need to have this person. And it's that need. And we're like, oh, that is so amazing. But then when you really think about it, it should be a compliment. And I used to say in my own personal relationships, and when someone would be like, but I need you, I'd be like, I would almost rather you want me than need me. Needing me is more of a turnoff than somebody who's like, I don't really need you, but I want you. I want to share my life with you. To me, those are two very different distinctions.
Yes, absolutely. When my grandfather passed away, I remember our whole family really worried that my grandmother wouldn't survive. Like we were really worried that she's just not going to be okay. She lived an amazing life for the next 12 years after he passed on. And it was because she wasn't codependent, right? She loved him and they complemented each other in such a beautiful way. We all thought that she needed him. It wasn't that she needed him. She deeply loved him and they deeply complemented each other. But she could be her own person and survived. Sure, there was grief and there was sadness, but she didn't need him to survive.
Absolutely. A friend of mine actually gave a really beautiful analogy of relationships being like two trees. Like if you're two oak trees, underneath the soil, it's like you are deeply rooted, you have your own roots. And then as you are growing up and, you're kind of on the different paths, but then your branches might kind of intertwine and then you're kind of starting to share a little bit of life together, but you still have your own independent roots. And I thought that was kind of beautiful because that is what it's like. You're your own person. then
Yeah.
what you bring to a relationship is your own person, your own individuality, your own likes, your own hobbies and things like that. And then you start to have hobbies and things you like to do together, but it doesn't override or negate the things that you had as autonomy.
I love that. That's so much more, it's so much more pretty in imagery than the one that I usually say. I just talk about two concentric circles, like a Venn diagram.
Yeah, and then a little crossover in the middle. Absolutely.
Of course, it's so much prettier.
I'm curious, what does emotional independence look like in that concept when we think about codependency? Is there emotional independency? Like, how does that work with codependency?
Oh my gosh, that's such a great question. My take on that is emotional independency is related to your own emotional intelligence, right? And emotional intelligence is not just outward. It's not just I can relate to other people. There's also a sense of your own personalization to emotional intelligence. Like I'm paying attention to my needs. I'm paying attention to my wants. I'm paying attention to my value system, not in a selfish way, but in a self-acknowledgement way, right?
Mhm.
And so I think when we're talking about it in conjunction with codependency, emotional independence, I would still venture to say it's more like interdependence, where we're still showing up from an emotional standpoint of really knowing what our wants are, what our beliefs are, what our needs are, and finding ways for them to complement with the other person. Versus, because again, if we do the whole emotional independence, then it becomes I'm over here by myself in my own circle versus how can we create that interdependence? How do we still find that us in all of this?
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
again, I believe in order to show up the best we can, having that inner emotional intelligence, the part where we really are becoming our own self leader, we're paying attention to those things. And this was the work for me as a people pleaser. I really fought it, feeling like I was being selfish. This is not right. It is about other people. Like my number one top character strength a few years ago was humility. And that really is let other people shine. For me, see, with any strength, I feel like you can over rotate into it and it can become a weakness. And I think my empathy and my humility, I would over rotate into, and it was an overusage, right? So now it becomes not just a weakness, but it starts to burden you a little bit. I know that there was some self deprecation that would occur, and other people's needs are way more important than mine. And that's the key. It's that balance. And so as you start working on this, becoming aware of net emotional intelligence too, and becoming aware my needs do matter. It's not selfish. If I pay attention to those, I can have a healthy relationship with other people. I would venture to say that's a way through codependency too, creating this emotional interdependence where you also matter in the relationship.
Mhm. I mean, there's so many things there to unpack because when I'm thinking about high achievers and when I'm thinking about women, there is this need to people please, but then also sometimes that people pleasing comes from wanting to be the fixer. Like,
Mhm.
how can I
Mhm.
help this person? And I think when we're trying to be the nurturer and we're trying to help and we're trying to be the overachiever who can solve all the problems, we do tend to override ourselves. So I'm curious if you have any ideas. Like, how can someone begin to untangle their identity from that role of fixer?
I think as women and mothers, that's something we fall into routinely, and we take that on as our identity. And I
Mhm.
think the way that I talk about this routinely is there's that self as context. That's the roles we play. This is
Mhm.
based from acceptance commitment therapy based coaching. So there's that self as context where it's like the roles we're playing, and then self as a concept. And that self as concept is who we're being, what values we're leaning into, what are our character strengths. And I think leaning into that, recognizing, oh, this comes into naming too. I'm showing up as the fixer right now. I'm taking on that role. Name it, own it, acknowledge it. But then we have to take a values based action to say, okay, but who do I want to be? Do I want to be the fixer? Because when we fix, we're also not empowering the person that we're fixing for. So it's who do I want to be? Well, I want to be the person that supports. I want to be the person that helps this person grow. Awesome. Now what action am I going to take? I'm going to ask them what they think the solution should be instead of me just falling into that role. Part of this also leans into what I said earlier. It's like the need to be needed. A lot of us fall into the
Mm.
fixer because now we have a worth, right? We're fixing. So we've now proven we are worthy. You need us here. It's also paying attention to when that pattern shows up.
That is so interesting because, like, if we're constantly solving the problem, we're not giving that person an opportunity to grow or learn. So what we think is really being of service is kind of a disservice sometimes.
Yeah.
That's
I
super
really
powerful.
came to that. Think about enabling, right?
Hmm.
And in terms of how we enable other people in our lives. This comes up a lot with those of us who have had somebody in our lives who have had maybe an addiction. We try to solve it, but what we're doing is we're enabling them to continue. And then
Yes.
again, as a parent, right? If we solve everything, we're enabling our child to be dependent on us to solve it for them, and they're not learning that they're capable of solving these things. And so if we
Hmm.
think about what we need as humans too, we need autonomy, the ability to believe that we have a voice and we have choice. We need the ability to have the sense of competence. I can do things. And then we need this sense of relatedness, right? I can be loved no matter what I do. That releases shame. Those three things. Well, when we continue to fix for people, we're taking away competence. We're taking away that ability for them to see that they have the power within themselves to solve what it is, which is why I love coaching so much, because I'm not coming in and saying, do it this way. I'm really creating a space for my clients to say, oh, I have this like power within me to shift this, or I understand this in such a way that I can make changes. And they're living into competence, which we need as humans. And so again, if we fix, do it this way, we deprive them of that.
Absolutely. And you touched on shame, and it made me immediately think about how when people start to set boundaries and they start to try to pull back from people pleasing, especially after years of people pleasing, it
Mhm.
triggers guilt.
Yeah.
So, what would be your advice on how someone could stay grounded in that phase of trying to set boundaries to not be such a people pleaser?
So I'm going to say something that people are not going to love, which is 100% that's going to happen. It's a natural occurrence that when you are a people pleaser and you haven't had boundaries and then you're setting boundaries, it's uncomfortable for you. It's uncomfortable for the people that have known you in a certain way. The truth, though, is that the people that are meant to be in your world are going to be the ones that are uncomfortable and then readjust alongside you, and you create this new understanding amongst yourselves. The people who are not willing to adjust or the people who are benefiting from your lack of boundaries, and it may not be the healthiest relationship in the first place. So I'm just going to say that to start things off. But the way to stay grounded is truly radical acceptance. I'm not saying you need to be okay with like, oh, it's cool if somebody decides that they don't want to be friends with me or be in a relationship with me. That hurts and there's grief. But it's also to recognize that sometimes we have to just accept what is. I'm doing this thing. It's uncomfortable for me. It's uncomfortable for them. I'm not going to change that. I have zero control over that. What I have control over is what choices do I continue to make. So we have a choice when we're setting a boundary with somebody. We're uncomfortable, they're uncomfortable. Do we then totally bail and just say, never mind, I don't want the boundary? Or do we hold steady and say, okay, I recognize that this is uncomfortable, but this is for the benefit of our relationship, for us to have a healthy dynamic between the two of us and move through, right? Stay with it and remind yourself, like, it's okay to say, yes, this is hard. Yes, this is hard. And also, I'm doing this for my best, right? I need to do this in
Mhm.
order to grow or to create a healthier relationship with the person that I'm setting this boundary with.
That is actually really powerful because it's not about building walls, which I think is maybe what people struggle with. Is like, oh, I'm just putting up this wall and it's harsh. But the way you describe it, it's more about rebuilding self trust.
Mm.
Far more beautiful way to look at it. And then I'm curious about that too, because I know you talk about being your own self leader. And I'm curious if that's the same as sort of increasing self trust.
Absolutely. It's increasing self trust. It's increasing self compassion. It's increasing radical self responsibility. For me as a people pleaser, I've had to own when I have shown up and over functioned, not in a shaming way, but in a, okay, this was my part in this dynamic. I can accept full radical self-responsibility for that, and then I can make commitment of how I want to show up differently. What's my intention? So when I'm talking about self-leadership, it truly is leaning into kindness of self over judgment of self. It truly is leaning into owning your part in dynamics. It truly is into rebuilding, trusting your own needs, trusting your own inner voice. All of those elements create that sense of self leadership. And when we step into that, now we can take the next step and set boundaries because now we're clear on what works for us and what doesn't. And I want to say that boundaries aren't just with other people, they're with ourselves too. I'm going to set a boundary for myself that, I'm going to check my calendar before I say yes to somebody. That's not really a boundary with somebody else. It's a boundary with me because I would continually say, sure, I can do that. And then wonder why I'm so exhausted and have zero time to actually breathe during the day.
That is so true. I like the way you talked about self-leadership and then that release of self-judgment, but how does self-leadership shift the way that we show up in relationships, whether it's at work or just our own sense of purpose?
Well, in the context of self leadership, we're paying attention to what's happening inside us, right? When we're in the dynamics at work or we're in a relationship, whether it be romantic, parent, friends, it doesn't matter. We're aware of what's going on inside of us. We're aware of what it is that works for us, what doesn't work for us. We're taking accountability for how we're showing up in those dynamics. We're not coming from what I would consider either an emotionally charged place or a disconnected place. We're in a place of connectivity with ourselves. So we're not in this place of I have to prove myself. Instead, it's, this is who I am. I trust myself. I know what it is that I want, what it is that I need. And now I can also start voicing it to the people. Versus when we're not in that self-leadership place, we're almost we're coming from a reactive place where it's like we're chasing something constantly. Versus when we're in self-leadership, we can respond to situations because we know who we are. We know what's happening inside of us. We can take a breath and pay attention to how we want to respond to something versus I'm just going to react to like fix or make things, fit together.
That makes me wonder for people who have just been outsourcing decisions or approval to others for, let's just say, years, decades, and they are like, I want to go inward. I just don't even know what that looks like. I don't know how to do that. Are there practical tips or suggestions you would give to somebody on how to turn inward, how to begin that self-leadership where they are looking more inward than external?
I say the very first step is to go back to your own core values. I think most of us, even as adults, have not taken the time to learn them and do not know what they are. We think we know, but really when we challenge it, we realize, wait, that may have been how I was brought up. That was my family origins values. But what's actually meaningful to me at this stage of my life? And to be fair, they're going to shift as we get older. Like when I was in my 20s, motherhood was not a core value, but now it absolutely is. And it's okay for them to shift. But I'd say that's number one. And number two, as a people pleaser, oh my goodness, really sit down and identify what are your needs, like your core needs. We all have lots of needs, but what are the ones that are like, I really need this? Like for me, I need emotional safety in any relationship that I have, because if I don't have that, that's my North Star need. If I don't have that, I shut down in terms of being able to feel like I can trust that person and access that vulnerability. I need to have that emotional safety. But it's so important as a people pleaser to take that time to recognize what those needs are. I would say those two things are the first step into any of that. And it takes time. I say take your time with it. Notice, when are you happiest? It's like, oh, that's interesting. This is meaningful. When are you sad? That's interesting too. Flip the coin. You're sad because a value may not be being met. Flip the coin around. That's going to tell you what's meaningful to you.
That's 100% the case. I always start anytime I'm working with a new client, I always start the first session with core values. And what I find more often than not is two things. One, most people don't know. And so
Yep.
they're like, I
Yep.
haven't thought about it. I don't know what my core values are. Or they go through and they are like, oh, it's, going to be family and security. And they go through. And then when I ask why for each of them, they're like, I don't know. I mean, my
It's
parents were always pushing. So that's the
Mhm.
other thing. It's like, so you've learned it from your parents. So that may not be your core
Yep.
value, right?
Mhm.
If we are actually stripping away anything that has just been passed along, what are your core values? And then it's kind
Yes.
of like, I don't know. And so then there is kind of like, well, let's spend some time figuring out exactly what they are. And
Yes.
so I
And if
found
you're
that
doing
very
a lot of
interesting.
if you're doing a lot of executive coaching too, right? I've learned about people who are the individuals that I've coached in those leadership roles. It's so important. Again, going back home to those core values is important as a leader, because if you're going to be an effective leader, again, knowing what's going on inside of you allows you to show up as a more conscious leader.
Absolutely. That's
Yeah.
absolutely true. Yeah. And it's so interesting how when I explain core values, essentially kind of like the foundation. once you have your core values and like all your decisions, especially when I'm working with executives who don't understand prioritization or time management, burnout, like all those things technically stem from your core values. If you're making decisions from your core values, it's not nearly as complicated as it feels, right? When you don't have those clear core values, or you haven't thought about it, or you don't look at where they're showing up in your life, you're going to feel a little bit stuck, confused. You're going
Mhm.
to feel like something's missing because your
Yeah,
core values aren't being met or listened to or possibly even ignored, right? So
exactly.
that's interesting. One thing that I also talk about a lot is mindfulness, because I think that there is a correlation between doing the inner work and
Mhm.
mindfulness. And I know you also talk about mindfulness.
Yeah.
From your perspective, when you think about mindfulness in terms of support for emotional regulation, how does that help us break through the loops of being a high achiever or people pleaser?
I'm gonna add one more element to that too. People coming out of toxic relationships because there's so much
Yes.
building that has to happen. Because when people are in a toxic relationship and then come out of that, there's so much effort and healing that needs to go back into self-reclamation. I really feel that mindfulness is another piece of that. There's research out there that says 47% of our day is spent in the there or then, meaning we're either worrying about the future or ruminating over the past. If we think about people pleasing, we think about perfectionism, we think about coming out of a toxic relationship, most of our time is in one of those places. Mindfulness is about coming back to the present moment right here, right now, and reconnecting to yourself in this moment. And especially for those rebuilding and self reclamation, that self regulation piece is so important because what's happened is a lot of nervous system dysregulations. When you're in those situations, there's a lot of survival mode happening. And so your nervous system almost becomes conditioned for survival. And so you have to recalibrate the nervous system. So when I talk about mindfulness, it really is about coming into the present moment, reconnecting to your, from a somatic perspective, your own body, whether that be really putting your feet on the ground and feeling your feet on the ground, paying attention to your breath. I mean, breath is the life force, right? So just, I'm going to count as I inhale for 4 and I'm going to exhale for 6. And I'm just going to be in this moment right now. What we're doing is re-regulating our nervous system in those moments. And that allows for everything to come back into this place of even keeled, is how I like to, in layman's terms, we're in this even keeled state. When we're in that place, our prefrontal cortex is back online and we can get creative and problem solve and we can do all those things. So when we're in that perfectionist mindset, again, survival mode, I've got to get this right because if I don't get this right, I'm a failure or these people are going to reject me or whatever the thing may be. Self
Hmm.
regulation. We connect to the present moment. I'm not worrying about the future. I'm right here, right now. And then we can decide what's the next best step forward, right? What's the next action I'm going to take? Not 12 actions forward, but just this one next step. And then I'm going to build upon that.
That is very powerful. And the other thing is anxiety. We have such an uptick of anxiety in the world right now. And so much of it is exactly what you just said. It's because we're constantly living either in the future or ruminating about the past. We have so much anxiety because we're not focused on what's in front of us. The majority of the coaching sessions that I have is reminding people, bring it back a little bit. Like you're focusing on so far in the future and you're stressed about the future. And yes, we can focus on steps to get to where you're trying to go, but let's keep the focus here and now. What's the next step?
Right.
That's all we need to focus on. And when you start
Right.
thinking about this huge big picture, that's where a lot of anxiety comes from. And I know you mentioned earlier about kids in school. It's the same thing with that too. It's all this anxiety, I think, is coming from not being mindful and from
Yes,
staying so much into what's going to happen or what just happened.
absolutely. And I own it. I have anxiety. And one of the things I say to people all the time, especially when they come to me and they're like, my anxiety to go away. Listen, you're a human being.
Not going to
Like,
happen.
we're not, this isn't about like, I need to change my makeup. We're going to change the relationship you have with it. And that's
Yes.
what you're talking about. And I get absolutely talk about mindfulness. And I know that I definitely used it as a way to change the dance that I have with anxiety. It's going to pop up. And then we recognize it. And then we come back to the present moment. Exactly what you just said. What's the next thing we're going to do in the here and now? We can notice our mind wants us to worry about 12 steps in advance. Notice it, name it, and then come back to this moment and take that one
Hmm.
step. Because that one step's going to lead to the next step and then the next step. And that's where self-trust comes back in too, where you start to re-acknowledge that I can trust myself to continue on all the steps. I don't need to know all 32 steps right now.
The one thing that also comes up with self-trust is there needs to be a level of self-compassion with it. Because I think a lot of times when I'm talking about self-trust with somebody, they will have that harsh judgment, where
Hmm.
it's like, I've made the wrong decision before, or I don't trust that I'm going to make the right decision. And so sometimes when we're talking about self-trust or mindfulness, they don't want to sit in the space of mindfulness because they're judging themselves.
Hmm.
And so everything feels like harsh judgment or guilt or shame or something around that. And so I'm curious if you have any tips on how we can bring self-compassion into those moments when we're triggered to judge ourselves harshly.
First of all, it's to catch the judgment, right? Self
Hmm.
critic, when we're saying, how can I trust myself? I've never made a good decision. And then we challenge it. Well, what's actually true? And even if we can get to one specific moment where we said that was the wrong decision, nobody's going to dispute that it wasn't the outcome we wanted. But then we ask this compassionate question of, what did I learn out of that? Or what did I do when that didn't go the way that I wanted it to?
Hmm.
Well, then I did this, right? Because we're here, which means we worked through whatever that decision was. Whatever we're judging ourselves for and saying that was the stupidest decision ever. Okay, but we clearly lived through it. So you must have done something to continue moving forward. And that's where that self compassion comes. Even when I made a decision I wasn't happy with, I chose the next thing to do and I moved forward, right? The result didn't change, but I continued to move forward.
From what I'm hearing, it sounds like that would work with shame and guilt as well, right?
Yep. It's exactly
Okay.
right. Because shame says there's something wrong with me. And we
Hmm.
lean into that when we feel like we made a terrible decision. We say, I can't make any more decisions because I'm not capable, which is shame. There's something wrong with me. I can't make decisions. But if we break that down into, okay, that wasn't the outcome I wanted, lean into curiosity, compassion, kindness. Okay, what did I learn from that? And also, what's actually true? Is it that that decision makes me not a good person or incapable of decisions? Or was that the information I had at that time, now that I have this other information, I wouldn't make the same choice? Because most often when we look back on a decision we made, we now have more information than when we did at the time of making the decision. And
Hmm.
yet we're judging ourselves for what we knew at that point in time. So this current self is like, oh, you should have known better. It's like, okay, but what's true is I only knew A, B, and C. Myself today knows A, B, C, D, and E. Well,
Yeah.
if I had D and E at that time, sure, I may have made a different decision.
When you think about shame and guilt, those are the two that mainly keep people stuck a lot.
Mhm.
Um, it's not necessarily just bypassing them, right? But it's like,
Right.
how do you help clients work through it
Yeah.
without feeling like something's wrong with me, something's bad? So without bypassing it, how do you help clients work through that?
You're making a great distinction. Shame and guilt are slightly different. Guilt is saying I've messed up and I've done something wrong. With
Hmm.
guilt, we can say, is repair needed? Asking, is repair needed? And if the answer is yes, what action are we going to take to make that repair? Sometimes guilt shows up and repair is not really needed. It's actually our inner critic saying, for instance, boundaries. We feel guilty and then we challenge it. Okay, what's actually true? Do I need to make a repair here? Do I need to
Hmm.
apologize to my friend who calls me at 3 in the morning that I'm saying, please don't call me at 3 in the morning? No, that's just my inner critic saying this is mean. But if I snap at my child because they happen to ask me a question when I was in the middle of something, guilt pops up. Okay, yes, I think I want to make repair here. I'm going to apologize for how I showed up. That's guilt. Shame is the bigger one that really does keep a lot of us stuck, or we're telling ourselves there's something wrong with us. For shame, I use the metaphor of mold, which I know is not a very pretty thing to use, but mold grows in the darkness. It grows in the darkness and in wet. And so the way through it is to dry it out. And we do that with sunshine and with bright light, right? And it's kind of the same thing with shame. It's going to continue to grow if we don't talk about it, we don't witness it. So when we're shaming ourselves, we've got to witness it. We've got to call it out. I'm telling myself that there's something wrong with me. Call it out, bring it into the light so we can look at it and then we can really say what's actually true. Is there something wrong with me? Or is this, did I make these decisions based on this information I had? Is there really something wrong with me? Or is this an old story that I've been told? So many kids have been brought up in toxic dynamics. They go into adulthood and they're shaming themselves, thinking there's something wrong with them. And part of that is to really bring to the light, those are messages I received as a child. Those aren't even true. They were messages I received. I internalized it as there's something wrong with me. What's actually true is I am a lovable person. I have
Mm.
quirks. We all have quirks. We're human beings, but also I'm doing the best I can and I'm living my life in alignment with my values. We start breaking it down, but that's really how we deal with shame is we've got to call it out and then we've got to challenge it.
And the other thing that I was thinking about in terms of shame, I think it's shame or maybe guilt. I'm not sure. But what I hear a lot is, like, I should be further along now. I
Mhm.
should have known better. Like those
Right.
types of sayings.
Mhm.
And what I think is if you're in the thick of healing and you're navigating that self doubt, I'm curious, what would you say to someone? Like, what reminder would you give them when they're in that, like, but I should have known better or I should be further along now? What would you say?
My biggest response to that, I should be further along, is by whose standard?
Mm,
Simply asking that question because it stops people. They're like, wait, right.
mhm.
Who made up that rule? Who made up that timeline? I should have known better. But again, it's not like by whose standard, but it's more about how would you have known that information? Would you have
You didn't
acquired
have
that
that
information
information before.
until we got to this point? Now suddenly we've learned something.
Yep.
And so we just challenge because the shoulds are fear that I'm either not enough or not doing the right thing. We're basically calling that out. And awareness is that key, right? Become
Hmm.
aware. Now we can start moving through it.
Absolutely. And I think that's also a beautiful way to look at it because a lot of what we're talking about is healing. And yes, it can be messy, but it's worth it.
Yes.
I know we're close on time, but I do want to bring this full circle. And so I'm curious, when you look back on your own journey, was there anything that surprised you most about healing? Like if something looked like you didn't think it would, or anything that just surprised you about your own path?
My biggest surprise was just how connected to myself I could actually get. It's not something that we conceptualize. Like the ability, I just know it in how I show up now. It's weird to say, but I'm not afraid of my own self anymore.
Yeah.
I think there was almost a fear of really acknowledging who I was. I used to like shrink. And now it's like, no, 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 I'm taking up space in the room.
What would you say to someone who's listening and they're realizing I may have been living my life for others, but I don't really want to do that anymore, but I also don't trust myself to lead my life differently. I don't know what that looks like. I don't know what that would mean, and I don't want to blow my life up. What would you
Yeah.
say to that person who's listening?
Well, first of all, acknowledging it and saying absolutely 100%, I get it. It's very scary to do something different and not, we find safety and certainty. So we know what we've been doing. It feels safe. So just really acknowledging that and normalizing that. And then you don't have to blow up your life. It's not, oh, I need to just go change everything. Small changes will compound. So start with one little thing and then allow
Mhm.
that to build and progress. Again, I think people are scared of change because we think that we've got to make this huge leap. Eventually you'll do it, but you can start with these smaller changes, smaller adjustments, and they will create the larger change.
That's beautiful. And the reason I love that so much is because, yes, people think that they have to make this big change and it's going to blow up everything. And that is the fear that keeps them where they are, that keeps them content because it's this uncertainty and this is scary. But if you're making small changes at a time, you don't really have to make these huge changes. And one small change will show the way to the next change also. You don't have to do this one big thing and then put all your eggs in this basket. It could just be something small.
Exactly.
If there is one core message about healing that you could leave our listeners with, what would it be?
I would say what you said earlier about self-compassion, that as you're going through your healing journey, really leaning into self-compassion, kindness over judgment, allow it to evolve without putting rigid timelines or expectations on yourself.
And then where can people go to learn more about you and your book or your podcast?
Well, I am on the web. I hang out on the web at kaminiwood.com and on Instagram and Facebook with the handle It's Authentic Me. I do have a little mini cast, which is Rise Up, Live Joy Your Way, which is on Spotify. If anybody wanted to connect with me, website, Facebook, Instagram, you got me.
Thank you so much. And there's so many things I wanted to cover with you today. So I was trying to cram so much in, but might have you back on to just because there's still so many questions I have for you and would love to talk to you about. But thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you for having me. I've loved this conversation.
I thank you for joining me today. If you enjoyed this podcast, please feel free to rate it or leave a review. If you have any thoughts or questions, I would love to hear from you. You can email podcast@corehappiness.com. For show notes and additional resources, you can visit www.corehappiness.com. As always, please remember, never let anyone diminish your light. Until next time, sending you my love.